So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War and to another battle replay, and today we have the third and possibly final in the little clutch of Silmarillion replays that I was sent all in one go. I do have another 1v1 as well, which I might show as sort of an additional video at some point if I do have enough time to squeeze in an extra recording session. But we'll have to see on that one. I can't really make any promises on that because it would be in addition to the regular schedule as opposed to being a part of it, because that's tend to be how I treat 1v1s really, because of how popular they tend to be relative to everything else. But today we have what is really a pitch battle. It's going to be a 3v3. Battles like this, I do prefer it when the pitch battles have got maps like this where there's a lot of features on the map that can be utilised, and I think it's more important in Silmarillion as well because of the different strengths of the factions being more extreme perhaps than in Reforged or other similar mods, and it is quite necessary for some factions to have certain things going in their favour, and if you turn every map into like a sort of flat green square like the grassy plains, it's going to favour some factions because of the way that Silmarillion works over others. So I do prefer pitch battles that are like this, ruins strewn across the landscape, especially on high bits of terrain, so it'll be interesting to see. And the theme of this map, it is all good factions actually on the field today, only the red team have dipped more into human elements to their army, whereas the blue team are fully elven. So do those human auxiliaries actually have a place on the battlefield, and are they useful enough to justify their place there? We shall have to wait and see. The blue team would suggest not. Starting off with the player who sent me the battle replay, which is Kamul, Lord of the Easterlings, who is playing as the Falathrim, the elves of the Valas. So again, combined arms, not just combined arms, but also differing viewpoints on armour. Very much a sort of a faction that you need to have synergy with your own units in to play as effectively, I think. They've got these high tier Noldor units. The HALETH are a really tanky unit of heavy infantry, heavy armour. They're not multiple HP, but basically they're one step away from being of that level. Very useful unit this. The Noldor units are very expensive, but they are a really important tool to build around for the Falathrim. However, the one thing that they do tend to traffic in, more so than the other elves, is they do tend to be a little bit more numerous. The Brithombar units are a selection of light infantry units with various forms of armament. The Seafarers are a macemen unit, which is really important because, again, outside of this, they don't really have any armour piercing in melee, and they are a basic unit of AP as well, so to get the best out of them, you need to support them with other units on the front line, like I said, otherwise they can be exposed because of their lower survivability relative to other elves. More HALETH are there. Rangers of Brithombar are a light arch unit, good at dealing damage as most entry-level elven archers are, but if they do get caught in a sort of skirmish ground war, that's where the heavier Noldor archers are going to have to come into play for the Falathrim, because you're not going to win many skirmish fights with the Rangers purely because of their light armour. Especially if you don't get the first shot off, it can be pretty hairy for you. More Rangers back there. There's also some Marines of Brithombar, which, like I said, they are the dedicated javelin. So I'm not sure whether they're hard target or soft target javelins. I would assume hard target, otherwise it doesn't really make much sense that the spear host of Brithombar have been given javelins as well, because they both then pretty much fill exactly the same role, only with a different secondary weapon. But I could be wrong on that. We also have the Orion Ephedun, the one unit of Falathrim infantry, which is multiple HP, and they are very tanky indeed. Again, very heavy armour, as all of the Noldor have, very big shield value. Also spearmen, which just tend to be a more defensive unit in general anyway. Very useful to have at the centre of your Falathrim army. Got some Marines of Eglarest, which again, they're spears in melee and javelins at range. Once more, I'm not sure, because of the new sort of differentiation which has been brought in for javelins, I don't know where the Falathrim javelins would land on the spectrum. I mean, to be honest with you, you would expect most of these to be soft target javelins, but they're bound to have at least one unit of hard target javelins, considering that it is a significant focus of the faction. So you'd expect them to have at least one unit that can do that functionality. I'm not entirely sure which one it is, to be honest. I know it's not the spear host though. They are definitely a soft target javelin. The Mariners of Irendil, the legendary company for the Falathrim, essentially just a bulked up version of the Warriors of Eglarest, with a few different little bits and pieces as well, like a bonus against monstrous units in melee. A very nice unit to have at the centre of your line as well to boost morale. And here are the Warriors of Eglarest, essentially the regular version, which are a good, solid, medium armour line infantry unit. They've got plenty of line infantry, to be fair, the Falathrim, but it's how you deploy them. It's how you organise them, which is key. And actually they do have some more units over here as well. A couple of units of the Scouts of Eglarest, which are, again, sort of a medium armour melee cavalry unit. More useful for securing your flanks than going on the attack, to be honest with you. There are plenty of factions in the game at this point that have got more aggressive cavalry than the Falathrim, but to have these guys in the way and give you a bit of mobility is still a very useful thing. And then there's some Seafarers of Brythonbar, Warriors of Eglarest, and Spear Host over here as well, potentially going to join up with their ally in the middle of the blue team, which is Richie, who is playing as the House of Finrfin. Always going to be a popular faction, I think, Finrfin, because a lot of players do tend to be a little bit more defensive, especially in sort of the Medieval 2 meta, I think, being what it is. And Finrfin do tend to play into that a little bit more so. Marksman of Nargothrond. Split shot arrows, very, very damaging potentially, especially considering they are across the way from one faction which may do pretty poorly against the split shots. We shall have to wait and see. And the Archers of Haladin, which is sort of more of a standard unit on the front line, which you can sit here, shoot into the enemy and not be too concerned. They have stakes apparently, which is something I didn't realise. That must have been something that was added, I think, because stakes are somewhat of a rarity in, or more of a rarity in Silmarillion for these kinds of units, I think. Swordsman of Talathdin, and again, soft target javelins combined with sort of a medium armour line infantry unit. And yeah, they're a good, dependable unit, this, for the House of Finrfin. They're not really the match winners that everyone likes playing as Finrfin for, but they won't steer you far wrong, the Swordsman of Talathdin. And this, however, is really the unit which defines Finrfin alongside the Wardens. The Bridgewards of Nargothrond, they are the most elite pike in the game. It'll be interesting to see if the Nalgrim, who are the only faction that are yet to be added, I think, that are confirmed to be sort of on the way. I wonder if the Dwarves will get access to an elite tier pike like this as well, because as it stands there are only two in the game, one sort of lower end pike unit, and this is the elite one. But yeah, it gives Finrfin such a useful tool on the field, and it's the reason why you really don't want to tackle Finrfin head on if you can help it in most situations. Defenders of Talathdin, and again, yet more soft target javelins, only this time they have a spear instead of a sword. Again, Finrfin all about these spears and long weaponry types, so you'd expect that. Warns of Nargothrond, armour-piercing spear, along with the Bridgewards, they are sort of the defining thing in Finrfin. Makes their front line so solid, so difficult to wear down, and also it's capable of dishing out damage in return as well. Another unit of Wardens there. And back here, the General's Bodyguard unit, I believe, the Arqueni and Mormagilwa. One of two, I would say now, outright aggressive units in the Finrfin Infantry Corps. This one is the better of the two as well, because they are multiple HP, a very small unit, but really there are not many units in the game which individually can boast the quality of the Arqueni Mormagilwa, and I think we will be seeing one on the other side of the field today, but we'll have to wait and see on that. And the final blue team army is going to be the Guarded Realm of Doriath, played by Captain Gervais. Definitely an aggressive faction when it comes to their weaponry. We have the Cuthalim, which are an armour-piercing archer, heavy armour as well. Good in melee, actually, with their two-handed swords. There is Fingol himself. It'll be very interesting to see how they perform on the battlefield today. We'll see. I mean, armour-piercing archers are relatively few and far between, so they can be a very useful tool. The Girdle units are sort of the lighter units of Doriath. We have the Spear Host of the Girdle, which again, soft target javelins. I believe they still have their poison projectiles though as well, which does set them apart a little bit perhaps from the other soft target projectiles, in the sense that you can actually slowly whittle the enemy down, but you can still break them reasonably well if you utilise them at the right moments. Rangers of the Girdle, pretty similar in many ways to the Rangers of Brythonbar we saw on the other side, only probably a little bit stronger in melee because of the damage they can kick out with their axes, a real staple of Doriath. Shield Bearers of Region, one of the heavier units in the Doriath front line. Again, big shield value, not so much armour in Doriath's sort of heavier units as in some of the other Elven factions. They're not the lightest Elven faction, but neither are they the heaviest really. But the Shield Bearers are a genuinely really bulky unit which you can use to shore up your front line. More Spear Host. The Warriors of Region are one of the standout units from Doriath, because few factions have got a unit which is as good at kicking out armour-piercing damage that they can use en masse as this is. In fact, probably no one. There are individual units of armour-piercing infantry which are of course better than the Warriors of Region, but none that can really be massed up to the extent that these guys can be. Sword Host, good unit to have on the front line again, another bulky unit. More defensive than the Axe Host of Region, or the Axe Guard. No, they're the Axe Guard, aren't they? No, they're the Warriors, so yeah, the Axe Guard of Region. But I think that's to be expected, because if you're bringing the Warriors of Region, you're fully stocked for aggressive infantry anyway. The Tier-N Lysdannen, which are a high-mass, armour-piercing axe-thrower unit. They're relatively light, however. They do have a good shield value, but even in comparison to the other Doriath units, their armour is not actually all that impressive. It bears more in common in terms of style and in terms of functionality, actually, to the kind of armour you'd expect from a Syriand. So do beware. They are somewhat fragile, but they can also be very, very deadly if you utilise them at the right time against the right kind of units, which is why I think they're so popular. Axemen of the Girdle are back here. Again, more throwing axes. Doriath have got plenty of throwing projectiles that maintain their base damage, actually, so they're not just sort of harassment projectiles in the same way that some others have. Doriath actually have some punch to them in a lot of cases. Marksmen of Region with their silver thorns can also make advancing towards Doriath very difficult. More shield bearers. And then also we have the Mounted Company of Region, which, to be fair, are pretty much along the same sort of lines as the Scouts of Eglarest, in the sense that other factions certainly have better and more aggressive cavalry forces than Doriath, but bringing this means that you've got plenty of mobility and they're melee cavalry, so if you can bog down enemy cavalry units, you can end up getting a lot of good value for your trouble. Now then, moving on to the red team, starting off with, actually we will start off way back over here, because this is the faction which started off over facing off against Doriath, but is going to be moving, which is the Hidden City of Gondolin, the only faction on the red team actually which will not be including any human units, but even so they've decided to take up arms to try and assist the human inclusive factions with General Artorius. Armourers of the Hammer, a good choice I would suggest, because there are going to be armoured units on the other side of the field which are probably going to be present, so while you may pay a little bit more for having a line infantry unit which is armour piercing like this, I do think in this case it would be worthwhile. We've also got the Shield Bearers of the Tower. We saw how effective they can be in that free-for-all, actually really good at holding the line because of that sort of pseudo spear wall situation they've got going on, thanks to their animation and how densely packed they are. Very unique unit really, not so much in what they are, because they are effectively just a spearman unit, but because of those two things they do set themselves apart, which is pretty cool to see. We once again have the Champions of the Fountain, again Relentless. Relentless is actually going to be a theme in this battle, particularly on the red team side of things, because one of the factions relies on the Relentless trait quite heavily. Champions of the Fountain though, Relentless, really good at dealing damage, especially to more lightly armoured units, because they're not armour piercing. Their base damage means they can still do the business against heavily armoured units, but you've got to be really careful about committing your medium units in, which of course Doriath have quite a lot of, but so too do the Falathrim, so we shall see. Back here, the Lords of the Golden Flower, something which I'm surprised, considering the last two Silmarillion replays we've seen Gondolin in both. I've been surprised, particularly in the Angband one, that we didn't see J-Monster bring the Lords of the Golden Flower, to be honest, because they are 3 hit points, really, really deadly. They could actually be the strongest two-hand unit in the game thanks to that 3rd hit point. Kind of depends what you're after. The armour piercing and the slightly higher unit count of the Sons of Hurin could throw that into doubt, but a 3rd hit point, like I said, is so significant. They also chuck out a hell of a lot of damage against monstrous units. Not terribly relevant in this battle, because they're not going to be facing off against Angband, who have got those monstrous units, or any other factions that traffic in chariots. But Lords of the Golden Flower, individually incredibly powerful, and we shall see how powerful in this battle. More Shield Bearers of the Tower, and I'm sure there's a couple more units that are hidden around as well. Then, in the middle, we have Fingolfin with some Herdsmen of Hithlum, some Herdsmen of Dorlomin, and the Sons of Hurin are in here as well. So you can see, a significant amount more, around 20 more men at 2 hit points, and of course they have got that huge charge bonus and the armour piercing. So interesting to see actually which of those two would the general consensus would be as the stronger of the two. Herdsmen of Dorlomin and Herdsmen of Hithlum, so plenty of human units. We shall see if they are up to the task of withstanding an onslaught from House Finrfin. I mean, armour piercing in melee for the Herds of Hithlum is one of the reasons why I really rate them as a unit. Individually, they're no match winners by any means, but they definitely are multifaceted, which is always useful to have a bit of hybridisation. Herdsmen of Dorlomin and Sentries of Hithlum again, so we actually haven't seen any Elven units from Fingolfin at the moment. I'm sure we will get there, but more Herdsmen of Hithlum, more Sentries of Hithlum, more Herdsmen of Dorlomin, more Herdsmen of Dorlomin, and in fact, no we won't. So we are going to be seeing an entirely human Fingolfin army. That is a really interesting thing. I mean, Stewie has crafted an army with 2 Sons of Hurin, plenty of Herdsmen of Hithlum. I mean, he's got all of the ingredients for this to be effective. The Sons of Hurin are very strong for dealing damage, they've got the pikes and so on and so forth, but it's a challenge to build a Fingolfin army like this without having at least some Elven units and still being effective, so I kind of like that. It does fit the theme quite nicely, doesn't it? And finally, we have the House of HALETH, the Haladin, a faction which I haven't shown up till this point, but they are the other new faction in the game alongside the Hidden City of Gondolin. Now, we won't be going through them in great detail right from the off. We will be as the battle goes along, of course, but they have a ton of units that can hide, not unlike Assyrian, and because they're on the red team, we can't see most of their roster. Regardless, I would point you towards J-Monster if you want to see the faction in depth, but a quick overview is the fact that they are kind of like Assyrian in the fact that they like to spread themselves out with hidden units to counteract the fact that they are lower tier in general than someone like Assyrian. They've got high morale, so their lower tier units do not break so easily, and a lot of their units can also inspire. Anyone that wields a sword in the Haladin is also going to be relentless, like these gentlemen here. We'll get onto them in just a moment. Also, there are Berserkers, which are relentless. They have the relentless trait more so than any other faction in the game, which means even as they are taking hits, they are continuing to swing themselves. So they go down swinging, basically. And lots of hidden units, like I said. Plenty of projectiles as well, throwing projectiles. They've got a few archers. They are pretty much a guerrilla warfare faction, more or less. But we'll see that in action as the battle goes along, because it's easier to sort of explain what the units are doing and when. Generally speaking, the Haladin are not going to want to get involved in any sort of elongated line battle or ground war against heavier factions, but if that is unavoidable, then this is the best unit to use in that situation, the Swear Barathia of Thargelia. They are effectively a medium armour line infantry unit that are relentless, so they can actually punch above their weight a little bit among the medium tier units, but if they come up against a heavy unit of line infantry or a faction which is more inclined towards that sort of really gritty, grindy battle on the front line, they will start to struggle, but they definitely have their place. They also have very high morale. They're good for what they are, but they are pretty much your only option in a similar way to how like the Rathloriel units are for the Assyrian elves. So just bear that in mind. The Ulfedin of Ethilbrandir are a Berserker unit. They actually have a bit of missile resist, or it's effectively just a shield value. It's very minor though. They're multiple HP, they're armor piercing, and they're also very high mass, so they push their way into enemy lines. Of course, this does mean that they will fizzle out as soon as you commit them relatively quickly, but they can do a lot of damage when they do so, so really timing is everything with the Ulfedin. The bodyguard unit for the House of HALETH is the Dawawada of Ethilbrandir. They are an armor-piercing javelin unit, single HP, but for the Haladin's standards they are reasonably tanky. The real thing, however, here is the fact that they can deal those armor-piercing projectile damage that you want. Very, very nice, but again, reasonably fragile among the bodyguard class, so do be careful. And back here we have a unit of chariots, the Voldschreiter Wain Riders. A lot of Germanics going on here, bit of a sort of Saxon, Celtic, sort of Nordic hybridization of styles for the Haladin. And they are sort of an anti-cavalry harassment chariot. They are technically sort of a monstrous unit because they are an elephant class unit, but the same thing applies with them as applies with all chariots really that I've explained in the Medieval 2 mechanics. You need to be careful with them because if they get bogged down they'll die pretty quickly. It is worth saying as well, their texture isn't fully finished yet because the horses look like they're made of wood, but that will be fixed, of course, in the future, but for the time being, this is them, and we'll see a lot of other units pop up, I'm sure. So without further ado, let's begin. It does look as though they're going to sort of dive for cover with Fingolfin, which I do agree with. Like, the Haladin are certainly a little bit more at home, engaging more so in spread-out warfare. I'd liken them actually to a little bit of a spider's web. You sort of draw your opponents in, and then you hit them with plenty of skirmishers that are all around them. And because of your high morale, once the enemy is in the trap, it can be very difficult to actually get away from them. Herdsmen of Hithlum are moving forward. I'd be worried a little bit about this kind of army from Fingolfin, because the Hithlum units outside of the Sons of Hurin are not the most heavily armoured, so stuff like the Marksmen of Nargothrond could be absolutely devastating. Looks like they're going to go up and around, however, which is kind of interesting to see. Gondolin, of course, are going to have to provide that real elven quality to proceedings, but even Gondolin, with their sort of heavier elven units, may struggle a little bit against the armour-piercing and just overall damage that Doriath can bring to bear. Gondolin are also going to need to get their way towards the front line very quickly, otherwise Fingolfin is going to find themselves taking a lot of heat from various sources. Here come the Wain Riders now, and they are anti-cavalry, like I said, so you've got to be very, very careful. Arrows coming in from the Herdsmen of Hithlum as well. They are going to get bogged down here, the Voldschreiter Wain Riders. God, that's a real mouthful, isn't it? Here are the Voldschreiter Dragoons, which are an horse archer unit, horse archer melee cavalry hybrid. So exactly the sort of thing that you want to be seeing here. The mounted divisions of the Haladin are actually very, very good. And this is the sort of scout fight the Scouts of Aglarest weren't going to want to take. Maybe a little bit of naivety there, just because you know what to expect from the Haladin more or less if you've been sort of following J-Monster's videos. They are the sort of faction which can all of a sudden spring up with a ton of units all around you. Here are the Freiswerer Brethels, the entry-level archer unit for the Haladin. Spears in melee, lighter archers. They do have a shield value, but again, the armour means that it's a difficult proposition to utilise them as a skirmish arch, but they're cheap enough that you could also justify it without too many issues. But yeah, the Scouts of Aglarest, like I said, taking the bait really, trying to charge forward, trying to get some good tags, but in the end, Fingolfin's archers were ready, as were the Chariots for the Haladin, and the Dragoons for the Haladin as well. That is a real theme for the Haladin though. If you're a big fan of heavy armour and sort of being that aggressive on the front foot, forming up a solid advance, probably not the faction for you, the Haladin, because they have lighter armour. You're more expected to be utilising their hidden mechanics, engaging from multiple sides, and that sort of thing. Not that they can't engage on the front line, like I said, with the units like the Schneider, but it's not where they excel. The Dragoons are moving forward. You can see the sort of the plaid on their capes, which is pretty cool. Still using ammunition on these scouts. I think that's a bit of a waste at this point, to be honest with you. I mean, 3 scouts of Aglarest weren't really going to achieve anything at all. This is a much better target. The Brethombar units, any arrow that hits stands a very reasonable chance indeed of killing off some Falathrim. I have to say as well, with the way that the map is actually laid out, it does look as though the human-led factions actually have a bit of a terrain advantage, which is quite interesting to see. The Dragoons charging in. They do have good base damage, so that means that once they do charge in, they actually can deal a decent amount of damage, but of course this is the problem. If they do get bogged down against infantry which can withstand a charge, like the very tanky Irendil, they can end up taking a lot of damage in return from that. And you can see now they are also spreading out wide. The Schneider getting ready to advance in on a little bit of the Falathrim elves, but also onto the Fingolfin position. If they're going to do this, the Haladin, then they will need Fingolfin to come with them, which is exactly what's happening. They're going to utilise the ammunition on their herdsmen of Hithlum to start. There are the Rigswehr, which are a light javelin, one-handed sword hybrid unit. They do a lot of damage, but they're very, very fragile for what they are. Like, without a shield, and the melee defense is a little bit questionable. Essentially, you can look at them as being sort of a low-tier unit in all aspects except the damage they can do where they're mid-tier. That's really the difference there. Meanwhile, Schneider, they are going to cut off the Irendil. This is the kind of engagement, to be fair, that the Schneider will come out second best in against a sort of genuinely heavy line infantry unit that is elite. But they are also preventing the Falathrim from getting across in support. And they don't need to win in melee, they just need to pin them in place long enough for the support to come in. And here come the Rigswehr. In fact, at this point we're going to go down to half speed, because this is going to be a battle where everything is happening really all at once. I do really like the Irendil. To be fair though, the Schneider are also taking hits in the back from the archers in the Finrfin position. But so far it hasn't gone all that well, you would have to say, for the Falathrim. A lot of their army is pushing its way up onto the high ground by the looks of things over there. There is also some units in behind enemy lines as well. Some of the Irendil leading the way with the Seafarers. Problem is, all they've done is run into some Warder of Brethil, which an entry-level spear unit for the Haladin. I mean, they're going to lose in melee to most Falathrim infantry units. In come the Doriath. A little bit surprised to see them committed to melee, to be honest with you. It's a risky thing to do to your general, but you can see also immediately Gondolin units are on the way, and I think the Falathrim have probably spread themselves a little bit too thin for my liking. Meanwhile, over on this side of things, not a lot yet. Doriath just moving their way into position. I think maybe they missed a little bit of a trick. They could have advanced forward a little bit more quickly and maybe caught out some elements of the Fingolfin army. That may also have been enough to convince the House of Finrfin to also start moving forward. But I do think so far, I'd say the red team have started off pretty well. They've managed to catch out some of the elements of the blue team, and they haven't been... their weaknesses haven't been exploited as of yet. Schneider, you can see, even though they have had a good engagement with support all around them, the Irendil are still doing quite well in the melee fight against them. The Relentless trait will be coming into play there as well, but of course the Irendil are the kind of unit which can definitely withstand a lot of punishment. Defenders of Talathdinin utilising their javelins on the Wain Riders over here, and you can see even basic javelins like this, they were already bloodied up, to be fair to the Wain Riders, but that is the end of the Chariots. They've already done decently in the battle so far. Hard to gauge how well the archers that have been riding on the back have been doing, but they were a big factor in very quickly crushing down the Falathrim cavalry. Stalkers of Tauren Faroth, assassin units, pinning in some of these Dragoons. The Dragoons probably need to get out of here at this point, they're in pretty hot water. And then in the backfield, it'll be interesting to see what the Falathrim continue to do, because this hasn't gone too well for the Falathrim. If they were going to flank around like this, they needed to have an army over here that was a little bit more substantial. And yeah, the Haladin were over here, but especially now that the real heavy hitters from Gondolin have arrived on the scene. The Champions of the Fountain and the Lords of the Golden Flower. Just in general, the Falathrim are going to struggle to deal with that sort of thing, but especially the Brithombar units. And over here, again, the Armourers of the Hammer being utilised in the right engagement. They will counter the Aran-Kielim quite nicely, who really pride themselves on that Noldor craft in their armour. The rest of the Falathrim, well, some of the Falathrim army is also heading its way over here now. This is a lot of resources that have been committed though over here as well. Like the Ulfadin probably don't need to be in melee, to be honest with you, at this point. There go the Aran-Kielim routing. Like, they need to get a lot of these resources elsewhere, I think, onto the front line. Otherwise, they could be in danger of Finrfin all of a sudden turning things around on them pretty quickly. Swordsmen of Talathdin in with their javelins. Defence in depth here from Finrfin. They're sending forward some swordsmen and leaving some behind so they can use their javelins. Again, soft target javelins, so they're not armour piercing, but the Sword of Brothir, medium armour. So they'll be able to resist these soft target javelins a fair amount, especially with the possibly with the armour upgrade that they can have. But we'll have to wait and see. Lots of the Sword of Brothir have been moved forward. Stalks of Tauren Faroth. Are the Haladin overextending themselves a little bit? Not sure. The Rigswear getting into a good position. The other unit is there as well. Damage being dealt in the back there of the Aran-Kielim. And then all of the Dorloman auxiliaries are also moving forward. Plenty of Thirdsmen. If this fight comes down to pure melee in the late game, it'll be interesting, because you've got quality pikes against numerous pikes in Fingolfin and Finrfin, especially given the fully human army that Stewie has elected to go with. It means he's almost certainly dumped even more money into his pikes than you would normally see. And over here we have the shield bearers of the tower as well. Herdsmen of Hitler moving forward, so the rest of the Haladin coming over here now. Again, I'm not really convinced that this is enough to cause too much pause in the red team. I mean, there's some good units up here, don't get me wrong, but I would be very tempted to leave a token force just sort of over here in the battlefield and kind of completely ignore them. There is another unit of Sentries of Hithlum over here. Some routing Warriors of Eglarest. So they're on the back foot a little bit here, the blue team, but this does mean that ultimately we will probably be seeing an attack from the red team, and a lot of their units are not going to do so well under scrutiny from ranged units. The Haladin in general, the human units from Fingolfin don't tend to have the same defensive attributes as the elven ones that you often see from that faction. Swordsmen of Talathdin and losing, I mean, they're both technically medium infantry units, but the difference here is probably going to be that the Sword of Brothir have got that relentless trait, so they're going to be able to continue to attack regardless of what's going on. The swordsmen can be staggered. I mean, this is, again, going to completely tilt the fight in one direction. The Sons of Húrin charging into melee. They're going to be chucking out armour-piercing damage at a fair rate of knots. Doriath are still on their way around. They've sort of been avoided for the most part by the red team thus far, which is very, very interesting. Captain Gervais has been sort of chasing the enemy around the map, and where the engagement is happening, I don't really think that the Falathrim, nor what was previously at the very least Nargothrond, are going to get anything from having their archers up here. If they could bait the enemy in that close to the cliffs, then yes, their projectiles are in an ideal position to take advantage of the more lightly armoured nature of a lot of the combatants they're facing, but the engagement is actually happening too far forward for that to actually be the case, and Ritchie has been baited into this engagement now. But the more that that Finrfin commit to this front line, the more difficult it's going to be to break through them, because this is really their bread and butter, this sort of line battle. The swordsmen are going to need some support from some of their better units, which is now arriving on the front line. The bridge wards of Nargothrond, they're going to try and contain more than anything the Sons of Húrin that they find themselves going up against. Something that would probably be quite useful here, dishing out some punishment, would be the Doriath skirmishers, in particular their axe throwers, Tyrann, Lysdannen and the like. Dragoons are out there. Interesting to not see the Lancers from the Haladin on the field today, because they can be pretty effective at what they do as well. They've gone for more of the skirmish cavalry. The Ulfadin as well. Ulfadin of Ethelbrandir, like I said, the armour-piercing component to them in melee. And there are the Warder of Brethil as well, which the lower-end spear unit. They too can be a decent component to your front line in support, perhaps, of the Sweardebrothia, because of their anti-cavalry. And they are less likely to run with the inspiration that the Sweardebrothia also provide for them. Let's go back up to 1 speed. But like I said, this is the kind of battle that the Haladin... It's not what they like, generally speaking, but they've already engineered a good situation for themselves. We shall see if that remains the case. They definitely need to get all of these supporting units into position fairly quickly. The hidden city of Gondolin is going to be very, very important as well because of the extra quality that they offer in several positions. This is what I was talking about though. This is how the blue team can start to turn things around. Now that the Haladin and the auxiliary Edain from Fingolfin are starting to really blob up on the front line, it's where Doriath's axe throwers can really start to come in and do the business. The Sweardebrothia taking the bulk of that for the time being, as well as a few sentries of Hithlum in there as well, so in support of the bridge wards. However, what's going on here, you can see that Stewie is force-pathing his Sons of Hurin right into the heart of these bridge wards, and as soon as their phalanx is taken away from them, the bridge wards will die in droves to something like the Sons of Hurin, as you would probably expect. The Arqueni have been committed to melee. Here come the split-shot projectiles, which had to be moved slightly closer. The angle's not quite as good for them now as it was, but they're firing into the backfield here, trying to go after some Sons of Hurin. Yeah, Gondolin need to get on the front line now. The quality is going to be quite necessary. Some shield bearers of the tower are in there. The Ulfadin and the Dowerwarder are also coming forward from the Haladin, so some of their better units. You can see here, this is the benefit to having higher mass on these Berserkers. They can push through. I mean, to be fair, that was a hole in the line anyway, so it wasn't even a case of them needing to push through. They just moved through a hole. But in they come. They're going to back up the Thirdsman. Actually, we're going to need to go back down to half speed because everything's happening all at once again. So the Ulfadin of Ethelbrandir getting into a good position here, alongside the Thirdsman of Dorloman. Their armour piercing will be very useful against the Wardens of Nargothrond, although to be fair, the Finrfin spears will probably still be able to outlast something like the Berserkers, who are a bit more of a flash in the pan. Back over here, the Mounted Company of Region, they are doing a lot of damage over time here against the Waldskreiter Dragoons. Some Warder of Brethil are moving in support of them as well, but it's a difficult... I mean, there's not enough over here to really take advantage of a full flank, but as long as they can prevent a counter flank from that Doriath cavalry, I think it's fine. Here are the sentries of Hithlum going up against the Brithombar Seafarers, and there's a few heavier Nargothrond units as well on the front line. So a good mix, but the pikes are going to hold them at bay, and they just need to buy time for this fight in the middle to take its shape. What have we got going on over here? Doriath making their advance, which is what they should be doing. Like, this is the kind of thing that they need to be doing at this stage. Warriors of Region are capable of chucking out more damage than the armourers of the Hammer. The armour piercing is more useful in this situation for Doriath than it is for Gondolin as well, so that's good. But Gondolin have got ready access to reserves as well. There are those Falathrim units in the background there which have stopped marching. They need to be hot-footing it toward the front line, to be honest with you. They need to hurry. Otherwise, this fight could get away from them. That flanking force could be really, really key, actually. Mounted Company of Region are getting in behind the lines, so hopefully they've got... The red team have got the ability to try and deal with that. Sent Herdsmen of Hithlum, axe to axe. Of course, are going to lose to the Doriath offerings here. Only the Sons of Hurin are capable of putting Doriath to shame when it comes to their skill with the axe. There are shield bearers of the tower which can be used against that Falathrim infantry force, but that will, of course, leave this cavalry unit unchecked. Fryswear of Brethil continuing to fire in, but in terms of the archer support as well, that's going to be going in favour of the blue team. They've got Silverthorn arrows, they've got split shot arrows that are doing their thing. They will run out of ammo fairly quickly because these specialty projectile units do tend to have more limited ammo supply, so it'll be interesting to see who they're firing at. I mean, Champions of the Fountain are a good choice. They've got good armour, so they can resist it to some extent, but you really don't want to be letting these guys get into melee and just doing their thing because they're such a dangerous unit. So many of the red team's units today bearing the relentless trait. Generally speaking, it's quite a rare thing, but when the Haladin are in town, that becomes quite different. Any Haladin swordsman possesses it, as well as their Berserker unit. So it's a nice thing for the Haladin. Either your unit is relentless and can continue attacking, or if it doesn't have a sword, generally speaking, it's going to have an armour-piercing weapon in melee. The Berserkers, of course, are the lucky devils who manage to snag both of those good traits. And they're getting in here. They're going to prevent the Marksmen of Nargothrond from firing at the very least. They've taken a bit of damage, but to be fair, they're actually still fairly healthy, and they should be able to defeat the Marksmen of Nargothrond in melee. They're going to continue to just run around this skirmish line and continue to interrupt it. But at this stage, you can see, with all of the skirmish support that the blue team have, the lightweight nature of all of the human units is starting to have a negative impact on the red team. And more, I think, as the fight goes on, for the red team to be victorious, I think they'll be more reliant on Gondolin to carry the day. Even if the humans have set things up quite nicely for the red team, they're going to need more. Shield Bearers of Region are completely surrounded very neatly by the Armourers of the Hammer as well, but they're going to get supported by some Axemen of the Girdle. Assume they're out of ammunition. And there are also some Sword Hosts of Region on the front line who are being introduced to the Sons of Húrin, which is why they're losing, because this engagement looks quite nice for Doriath until you realise that there are Sons of Húrin hidden amongst that little clutch of Fingolfin units. They're doing quite well on the front line. Yeah, those Falathrim units, they really do need to hurry along a little bit. Shield Bearers of the Tower continuing to be used to ward off that mounted unit. The Sentries of Hithlum, I mean, eventually they will lose over here, I think. These human units holding back the Doriath elves. But I mean, they're buying enough time is what I would say. Like, Doriath flanking around is something that needed to happen, because so far a lot of the gaps have been exploited more so by the red team. But I'm not convinced that the red team are going to have what it takes to outlast the beating that are going to be taking at range by so many of these archers. We'll have to wait and see. I lost track of where the Lords of the Golden Flower have gone, which is a little bit of a shame, because they're such a potent unit, and I'd like to see them in action. The Champions of the Fountain we can see just fine, however, marching with the Warder of Brethil. Yeah, these lighter Doriath units are exactly the sort of thing that the Champions of the Fountain are going to really enjoy fighting. Brythonbar unit's not great for the Herdsmen of Hithlum. Their arm piercing is not really going to have the desired effect, but there are enough of them over here that the Falathrim are going to start to struggle eventually anyway. Where are the Lords of the Golden Flower? I mean, they're green and yellow. There they are. They're in and amongst things over here with the support of their very nice Shield Bearers of the Tower. They're actually going to be going toe-to-toe more or less with the Arqueni Mormagilwa, which is, again, one of the few units which can actually claim to be of a similar level. Having said that, they're leaving proceedings now. And they're going after, I believe there were some Sons of Húrin in there, so Captain Gervais using his Tyrann Lysdannen to good effect. They need to shut these boys down. The more of these throwing axes they can utilise effectively, the worse it's going to be for them. I suppose, you know, hitting Herdsmen of Thorloman is not the worst thing, but they're going to be going after units which are a little bit more important, you would suggest. And Shield Bearers of the Tower, are they really the worst thing to lose at this point? Tyrann Lysdannen, like most units that are capable of devastation like that, have got very limited ammunition. Meanwhile, the Falathrim continuing to trudge their way into position. The Mariners of Irendil are here. Some Eglarest units, some Brythonbar units, some depleted Aran Kielin. They need to get into place pretty quickly though. More javelins that can arrive on the front line, which would be nice. But there are reserves. There are some Shield Bearers of the Tower which can be utilised. Herdsmen of Thorloman, and losing Micro a little bit there, but there's a lot going on in fairness for Doriath, but they are getting caught out. Fortunately for them, it's the Frieswear of Brethil, the light archers for the time being. They may be spears, but it's going to be more worrying for them if the Thirds can get in there, a more dedicated spear unit. So more of those Doriath riders are going to be falling by the wayside. Meanwhile, we head back up to 1 speed. Warriors of Eglarest doing their thing on the front line. Herdsmen of Thorloman are shaken and exhausted. It's an even fight, but this is the problem. Like, a lot of these human units are going to start to lose the taste for battle before the elven units that they're facing. Which is why I think as the battle goes on, Gondolin are going to be the key to success. And Marksmen of Region are going to get into melee here as well. They're trying to ward off the Mounted Company of Region with some Frieswear. The Warder of Brethil. There goes the Fingolfin general, slain by those axemen and swordsmen. Like I said though, like the Haladin, they've got good morale. In this sort of situation, some of the other human units from other factions, the Easterlings, Fingolfin, Feanor, may have run, but the Haladin, because of their higher morale, they're holding on nicely. Horns of Nargothrond are doing very well on the front line, as often they do. Herdsmen of Hithlum are getting charged by Mounted Company of Rhegion, who at this point are the dominant cavalry presence on the field. The Dragoons have long since dried up, and the Scouts of Eglarest were finished off very early on. Axemen of the Girdle are here. Some shield bearers of the tower in behind enemy lines. The Mariners of Irendil are going to try and intercept them so they can't get a rear charge. It's a little late though because those warriors of Rhegion are already leaving. The Falathrim not arriving in time to really save this Doriath flank in its entirety. There's still some Doriath units that can join up with the Falathrim over here, which is fairly key and is a sign, to be fair, that the red team are starting to run out of steam a little bit. A nice volley from the javelins there. Marines of Brythombar. A lot of them are getting back up, so I'd assume they're non-AP javelins. If they were AP, I would have thought more of those armourers of the hammer would have fallen, to be honest with you. Continuously getting back up, but that's useful in its own right because it interrupted that charge. Shield bearers of the tower getting into place. Marksmen of Rhegion. If this battle goes the way I think it's going to go at this point, which is a blue team victory, it will really sort of advertise what the Haladin can do and what they can't do. Because as soon as this fight became all about that grind on the front line, the fight has been more favourable for the blue team. And again, a large part of that could be the fact that it's Finrfin, one of the factions which craves that kind of fight the most against the Haladin. Possibly the faction in the game which wants to avoid that the most, other than maybe Osiriand. Lords of the Golden Flower are still a real problem though, because I think they're all still alive, and they're a 3 HP unit which can carve their way through anything 1-to-1. And there's still a lot of champions of the Fountain as well. So Gondolin will still be standing when all is said and done, even if the humans they're fighting alongside maybe won't be. The Kuthalim are now in melee. They've been silently going about their business, chucking out AP damage this whole time. And they're a unit which can go toe-to-toe with the Gondolin swordsmen as well. They're not relentless, but they do have that second hit point in comparison to the champions. And over here, more marksmen. And Herdsmen of Dorlomin are fighting off against the Marksmen of Rhegion at this point, but really all they're doing is trying to buy time. But it feels like that's all the red team are doing across the field at this point. All they're trying to do is buy time in several different places. And if you're not winning anywhere, then it doesn't really sort of serve any sort of purpose. I suppose this is where the red team have got to place all their eggs at this point. This is the basket. Some Rigswear, 18 of them. Still a fair few shield bearers of the tower all across the field. Like, this is honestly a unit I've been really impressed with in the 3 battles I've seen so far from Gondolin. The shield bearers of the tower, that sort of pseudo spear wall thing that they've got going on. Like, not quite as good, but it combines some of those strengths with the standard strengths of a shielded unit. It's really good actually for Gondolin, and I think definitely going to be an ever-present unit we see from them because they're very reliable. And you can build a nice front line around them, whether you want a bit of AP bite, like from the armourers of the hammer, whether you want low-tier killing machines, like the Axemen of the Pillar, numbers, Guardsmen of the Harp, or if you want to go really elite and go for some Gallants of the White Wing to go with them. You've got options there. Meanwhile, still some Dawawada in here, so the Haladin General is still alive, I assume. Unless he perished earlier and I just didn't notice, but yeah, the Dawawada are going to try and get out of there, but the armourers of the hammer at this point are just being overrun. So the Falathrim wing has arrived on scene quickly enough. You can see here that the shield bearers of the tower are going to be victorious here, but it's against really the dregs of a few units. Mariners of Irendil still in decent enough health, but those spears doing their thing for the moment. Where are the Dawawada going? They're trying to get into a more advantageous position on the flank, which is fair, but more Falathrim units are also on the way. Still the spearmen fight, and you can see at this point there's not really anything left from Fingolfin, there's not really much left from the Haladin. It's primarily Gondolin, as I kind of suspected. There are some herdsmen of Hithlum, there are also Sons of Hurin, maybe only 10 of them, but that's still significant considering the kind of damage they can do to armoured targets. 36 Lords of the Golden Flower, so some of them have died, but they really have showcased as well. They've been in combat for a little while at this point. You can see the bloodied armour and weapons. That, I think, was possibly the Fingolfin General. Well, regardless, they're having to try and get into melee here with some Marksmen of Rhegion. They still have ammunition. The Sons of Hurin do make it. They're going to be sent flying by those Silver Thorns. I mean, they're going to be engaged in melee here and probably be killed, those Marksmen of Rhegion. But over here, there's still a vast array of, in particular, Falathrim units that are still alive, which they will then have to deal with as well. But I don't know. I don't know if the blue team, to be honest, have got anything. I mean, there's 9 Orion Ephedun, who have been, again, fighting on the front line for a long time at this point. These shield bearers of the tower are just holding it down. Gondolin may have enough here to actually see this one through, because if it's the Falathrim left that are having to try and overwhelm something like the Lords of the Golden Flower backed up by some champions, I'm not convinced that's going to work for them. Like, those Lords of the Golden Flower are going to do horrid damage to Brythombar and Eglarest units especially, and they don't have any of their Noldor left because the Arankielim were utilised fairly early on and didn't go all that well. There goes the Falathrim General. Those shield bearers of the tower really doing the business. Certainly at this point you'd have to say an extremely effective unit. Gondolin of course are an expensive faction. Still a few Fingolfin units as well, like I said, 7 Sons of Húrin, 29 Fyrdsmen of Dorloman, 8 Herdsmen of Hithlum, but it's this. 34 Golden Flower Lords, 26 Champions of the Fountain are a worry as well. Numbers wise, it's, well, it's still in favour of the red team in terms of percentages by 2%. In terms of actual numbers on the field, I would assume, I mean, a lot of it is coming down to the fact that they just cannot seem to kill off these shield bearers of the tower quickly enough, and I do think a lot of that has to do with the fact that when they came over here to surround them, they didn't actually have many damage dealers, which is a problem that the Falathrim can suffer from in general if you build your army entirely based around sort of their light javelins and Brythombar units. You don't have the ability to deal damage all that quickly, and by the time they arrived, of course, Doriath were already fairly depleted, which was a problem for them. Shield bearers of the tower are on their way over here from Gondolin. More of them anyway. Lords, yeah, I think the red team are going to win this. I don't think they're going to have an answer for the quality spike that the Gondolin swordsmen are going to offer. And these shield bearers of the tower have just held it down. More so as well, regular spear wall units can't sort of bend back on themselves like this and maintain their cohesion, whereas the shield bearers of the tower really can. So I have to say, as a unit, they're really very impressive. And of course, if you combine that with all of the quality that Gondolin have in certain areas, I can picture them becoming a real fan favourite really very quickly. Lords of the Golden Flower are being targeted down at this point by Marines of Eglarest. This is probably the only way in which they're going to be capable of doing that, although you can see here immediately they are going to be interrupted by what's left of the Fingolfin forces, which is a real disaster for them because they needed those javelins to keep coming to support their units on the front. But Fingolfin still being alive has really put a wrench in all of that, and those Fingolfin units probably will lose to the Marines of Eglarest with how depleted they are. But then of course some shield bearers of the tower will be able to come over here, and yeah, this is it. They've fallen apart at the seams really. I mean, it does go to show that I think this was a really good showcase of both the new factions actually, of the Haladin and of Gondolin, because it showed what both are good at. It also showed what the Haladin lack a little bit. Like, they did damage on that front line, I'm sure. When we look at the kill counts, I'm sure the Haladin did some good damage on that front line, but they didn't have the staying power, clearly, that Gondolin did when they came in to see this victory over the line for the red team. So very well done. Close as well. 7% in the end. Almost entire. Well, Gondolin and Fingolfin left. The Haladin pretty much completely gone. But early on, you saw that the red team was able to really do some good work, draw the enemy in, pick off some stragglers, which is generally speaking what the Haladin can really do. Very strange army composition from Sturi as well that you won't see from Fingolfin all that much, fully Hithlum based. But it was 2 units of Sons of Húrin, which I would assume is where quite a lot of the damage came from, as well as the Herdsmen of Hithlum, which is probably why he got less kills, to be fair, because he was, most of his infantry force was primarily defensive, and obviously those pikes, good pikes for holding down a long front line. But in the end, it could have gone pear-shaped here for the red team because of the lower survivability and armour values on the front line, which the Hithlum units do suffer from in comparison to the upper tier Elven units, other than the Sons of Húrin of course, but also the Haladin. We got to see quite a few of the Haladin units in action today. the swordsman on the front line, the relentless trait, the berserkers doing their thing, pushing through lines, doing armor-piercing damage, causing all sorts of trouble. We saw the chariots in action doing their thing in shutting down some cavalry. We saw the horse archers as well charging in, showing their damage, but also showing the fact that, as with most Haladin units, they are a little bit fragile. So whether that's your playstyle or not, you can judge that for yourself, and whether you would like to play as the Haladin. They are a faction that you do need to be very careful with, but the rewards are great, as they say. And I think the main thing is, I think people like playing as a Syrian because it's based around archers more so than anything else, and that longer range means that you can execute on these plans maybe a little more easily in terms of dealing damage in a situation like this, whereas the Haladin, they tend to do most of their business like that with their throwing projectiles. We didn't see any of their axe thrower projectiles here. Their Huskarls and their Skjoldmire, which are two units I think you'll see quite a lot for the Haladin because they can do a lot of damage, and the Skjoldmire are also monster hunting units. They're pretty much the anti sort of elephant class units which the Haladin have because they have the throne trait. So you can expect to see quite a lot of them as well, but I'm sure that we'll see more of the Haladin already. We've seen quite a lot of Gondolin at this point. We've seen pretty much everything that Gondolin have to offer, with the exception, I think, of their cavalry, their Knights of the Golden Flower, which are pretty much the mounted version of the version that's on foot, in the sense that they are this very elite cavalry unit that's good at hunting monsters and other cavalry units despite being lancers. So they're kind of a really strong unit, but also very expensive, like most things in Gondolin. Gondolin have acquitted themselves well in these past 3 fights I've shown from Silmarillion, but you do have to remember that that's what they are supposed to be. They are a faction which is expensive, and you can see just from the fact that they had way less units on the field than anyone else. Everyone else had around the 2,000 mark. Gondolin are always going to be outnumbered, but yeah, they're that faction of real quality, regardless of what you do. So yeah, big thank you to Carmul for sending this one to me, and a big thank you to all of the players for being a part of this battle replay. Silmarillion's really starting to take shape. I think it's really looking quite good. I think the Nalgrim, like I said, the Nalgrim, the Dwarves are the only faction which I think are confirmed that are yet to be added. I think J-Monster was toying with the idea of adding a further faction beyond that as well, of another evil faction essentially, if the law would allow for it. Obviously there's some situations which have to be bent to allow that to happen, but as it stands, obviously with 2 Orc factions and 1 Easterling faction, there are effectively only 3 evil factions in the game, which on a campaign map would be quite interesting. I know that there are sort of campaign only things which are going to be happening, like the independent realms are going to include like units based on location on the map, like spiders and so on and so forth, which obviously are not a faction in and of themselves, but they're just going to add sort of real depth to the map so that you can see that in action. And the Valar as well, I think, are going to be a sort of campaign AI only faction. Possibly you can play them, but I think they're going to be sort of similar to how Dunland are over in Reforged, where you can play as them, but they're not really intended to be a faction that's well rounded and fits into the meta of the game in the way that the others are. So that is worth bearing in mind, as sort of Valinor may very well become something which is a thing in the game in the future. But again, this is just sort of the things that I've noted and remembered over the course. Next on the agenda, I think obviously this has been a round of changes which the game has undergone, but next on the agenda I would assume would be the design and implementation of the Nalgrim, the Dwarves, which will be nice to see. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.